Hello and welcome to Midi in Depth, part of Levant TV's Press Reviews. Today we will be looking at an article perhaps sort of justifying the attacks in Paris. It was in the New York Times. But starting in Beirut, David Ignatius writes an opinion piece in the Beirut-based Daily Star on the recent handling of internet security as part of cracking down on terrorism. Ignatius starts by asking what's the relationship between the internet and the surge of jihadi violence in Paris and around the world. Mark Sageman, former CIA officer, argues blaming the internet for radicalization is really blaming any form of communication for radicalization. Mere exposure to wrong ideas can explain neither their adoption nor their power to lead people to political violence. Sageman adds the dramatic increase in the number of Muslim foreign fighters in the Levant is mostly due to the large increase in the size of the online jihadi community, but he notes that the internet encourages decentralization because of the egalitarianism it promotes among its users. It is difficult to impose discipline or enforce one's orders on the internet. Sageman then warns against what he calls the alarmist bias in US intelligence reports and media coverage of terrorism. The recent attacks in Paris, according to him, are an example. American accounts have focused on the possibility of central direction from Al-Qaeda's affiliate in Yemen. This approach is fueling a peculiar American hysteria on terrorism, which forces politicians to be responsive and show that they are tough on terrorism. And according to Ignatius, one takeaway from Sageman's work is that the governments and individuals need to be careful about unintentionally feeding the grievance narratives of Muslims around the world. When people are feeling insulted, it's dangerous to insult them gratuitously again. Non-Muslims can say that Muslims shouldn't be offended, but why rub an open wound? And then he concludes it's like kicking off a hornet's nest. We're free to do so in an open society, but he wonders, is it wise? The New York Times editorial board featured an article titled An Inclusive French Republic, Paris Attacks Lay Bare Longtime Muslim Exclusion. According to the New York Times, the profiles of the three Paris attackers, Amedi Coulibaly and the brothers Sherif and Said Kouachi, are an indictment of the decades-long failure of France to address long-festering alienation and exclusion among too many Muslim immigrants and their French-born children. He says unemployment is as high as 40% among the youth in France's disadvantaged neighborhoods. All three attackers grew up in poverty. Sherif Kouachi and Mr. Coulibaly spent time in prison. All ultimately found deadly purpose in Islamist terrorism. Prison, according to the New York Times, was the crucible of their radicalization. There are 5 million to 6 million Muslims in France, less than 10% of the total population, but 60% of France's prison inmates are of Muslim culture or religion, according to a report presented by France's National Assembly. It was in prison that Mr. Kouachi and Mr. Coulibaly met the Qaeda recruiter Jamal Begal. To stem recruiting by Islamist extremists in prisons, the government of President François Hollande has announced it will seek to isolate identified Islamist proselytizers from other prisoners. And then the New York Times adds that there is the problem of France's secularism. A ban on headscarves in public schools and on full-face veils feels to many Muslims like an unfair constraint on their religious freedom. Some also find it hard to accept that blasphemy is not a crime in France, and that Charlie Hebdo and other publications have a right to satirize religious leaders. And some students in French schools with large immigrant and Muslim populations refuse to participate in the National Minute of Silence following the Charlie Hebdo attack because they objected to what they had heard about the magazine's depictions of the Prophet Muhammad. And as of mid-December, 621 citizens and residents of France were running off to fight in Syria and Iraq, or were already there, according to the government. Many have fallen prey to slick films produced by the Islamic State and other jihadist groups and disseminated on social media that glorify jihad as the ultimate rebellion against parental and societal expectations. The New York Times concludes that there is a real danger the right-wing National Front in France will seek political advantage by fueling anti-Muslim hysteria. For more updates, please visit levant.tv or subscribe to Midi in Depth on iTunes. Thanks for watching and bye for now.